You're waving at me like I'm not on, but I should be on. Okay, all right. All right, Genesis 11. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick and burn them throughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of the whole earth, upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So now, like we talked about here, the first 3 or 4 verses, they have the wrong kind of building materials. It's all man-made materials here. They have the wrong place to build. They have the wrong motive in building, and they have the wrong attitude toward God. Everything is wrong about this. And so now we had made mention that there is a group or a council of some kind that says, Go to, let us build, and they're making decisions here. And first of all, they decide to make brick. And so we found out that they have to make some kind of a brick kiln, some way to make brick. And of course, down around that area where there are slime pits down there, and that's where they get the pitch and everything for mortar. And so, and then they say, Go to, let us build a city and a tower. And the reason they want to build a city and a tower is so that they can reach unto heaven. And so, and not only that, now I didn't get this, and we'll mention this a little bit more later. And they say, and let us make us a name. So they want, by doing everything, by building a city and by building a tower, they're hoping to become famous for doing this. They want to make a name for themselves, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And so that, of course, gets the Lord's attention, and he comes down to see it. And so now remember, the city is the commercial symbol, the tower is the religious symbol. And it is man's projected desire to go upward, pictured basically man is always out of bounds. We found so many times that Nimrod and Canaan and Cush, everywhere they go, they run the people out of their land and take over their land. They're completely out of bounds in everything. And we've shown that over and over again throughout chapter 10 and 11. And so, but that man wants control of outer space. And so now they're building themselves a tower that can reach into the heavens because they want to control outer space. Now, nothing's any different today. I mean, Elon Musk still wants to build his space ships and everything to reach outer space. And so man is always out of bounds. Space is out of bounds for mankind. God gave the earth to mankind and not space. That's where all the principalities and the powers dwell. and the rulers of the darkness of this world. And so man is never going to be able to control that which he doesn't understand. And man will never fully understand outer space. And so, but mankind wants to explore it, and so they make entertainment, like Star Trek or Star Wars, so that way it can get mankind curious about what's up there. And so, but now we've come to a point where we got to ask some questions, okay? And so the Bible says that we may reach into heaven, and man-made religions never have assurance about reaching heaven. They only hope that they may reach unto heaven. That's why when you ask somebody if they're saved, I know God, I pray to the Lord. No, that's not the question. Have you ever asked Christ to save you? Well, me and the big man upstairs talk all the time. No. Have you ever asked Christ to save you? See, that's the whole thing. Man wants to get into heaven of his own accord. They want to reach outer space. They want to get to the third heaven by their own way. And so the question is, how can you build a tower that can reach unto heaven? How is it possible to do such a thing? And so, now, there's no doubt that these people like Nimrod and them, they have knowledge about the fallen sons of God already. There's knowledge there. We showed where Canaan went up to Zidon, started a couple of cities, Tyre and Zidon, all to try to get to Mount Hermon. And there's some technology there, not technology as we know today, but there's technology and knowledge there about the fallen sons of God. And if they have this knowledge, then it might be possible that they might be able to interact with the watchers again, or those that are in the heavenlies. So it's possible, if they have the knowledge, then there might be a way to be able to contact them. We know there is, because don't you talk to God? You know, He is the final authority in everything. And so if we can contact Him, well, that's the way they wanted to do, but they didn't care anything about contacting God. They wanted to contact those fallen angels again. And so you'll need to keep that in mind, because that's very important. And so these people in chapter 11 are building something to make contact with those fallen beings again. And they had to get it done quickly because they were afraid that they would be scattered abroad over the face of the earth. Now remember, go back to Genesis chapter 4, because remember, that was Cain's, what he was afraid of. Cain was afraid of that. Look at Genesis chapter 4 and verse 14. Cain says, "Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me." See, he's afraid of the same thing. And so these people in chapter 11 have to get this thing done. They have to hurry up and build this city. They have to get this tower built, and they need to do it before they're scattered. They know it's inevitable. They're going to get scattered one way or another. They're going to be too big. They're going to populate too much, where the one land is just not going to be able to hold them. So they understand that it's inevitable. We will be scattered sooner or later. So we've got to get this thing done. Now, this city and this tower, it has Cain written all over it. It has Satan written all over it. And for them to try something like this, it has to be possible to reach heaven according to this tower. It has to be. Now, the first thing, in view of the fact that the heavens could have been closer to the earth, that the moon before the flood, the effort to reach it again would not be considered in vain. There is a possibility that the heavens could have been closer to the earth before the flood. Obviously, it's not now, but it could have been then. We're not, scientists don't know that for sure. The second thing is, in view of this fact that the heaven referred to here may be a reference to the atmosphere, which is the clouds and outer space, etc., the efforts to reach it again would not be totally in vain. So it's possible to reach heaven. But Satan, when you line up what they're saying here in chapter 11 with what Satan said in Isaiah chapter 14, they're talking about getting to the third heaven. And so the question again is, how can you build a tower that can reach unto heaven? How can you do that? Well, when we read this story, do you think they were stupid? To be able to make a statement like this, you think they were stupid? No. Then the other alternative is, could it then have been possible? Yes, it could have been. These people were intelligent people. They had the knowledge of the fallen sons of God in their grasp, thanks to Canaan and Ham. And obviously, it was something that the Lord had to get involved in. He had to step right in the middle of it and stop it. Why? Because it was possible to reach. Now you say, how? Well, that's hopefully what we're going to get into. Now, if it was possible, then in verse 5, 6, and 7, if it was impossible, then why would the Lord have to step in and stop them? Why couldn't God just leave them alone and let them suffocate in the atmosphere? Right? You get high enough in the atmosphere and you're going to, you're going to reach for the next breath of air. Why? The air gets really thin. And so the Lord saw that it was something that was possible to do. And we don't have that technology today. We don't have it yet. Now, they're working on it. They're supposedly they're able to teleport to Mars and the moon and to Venus and all this other things, but not yet to the third heaven. Now, Andrew Basiago served a secret space project from 1980 to 1984. And he served this project. It was called Project Pegasus. And now it's come out within the last few years because of all this UFO stuff that's being able to come out and let everyone know now. But he served the CIA's Mars jump room program. And he says in his book that he had made 40 trips to Mars in those 4 years via a jump room. He published a paper titled The Discovery of Life on Mars. All right? And that was in 2008. You can find it and you can go read it. He admits that during the 1970s and 80s, he admits in there that 10 teenagers were enrolled in this Mars training program. In addition to Basiago, one of the teenagers was identified then as Barack Obama, who was then using the name Barry Soetoro. Okay? Now, along with him was Regina Duncan. And if you know who she is, that's Obama appointed her as the 19th director and first female director of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA. Yeah, he appointed her in 2009. She was one of the 10 teenagers, along with Barack Obama and Andrew Bagiago. They served from 81 to 83. These young attendees went on to teleport to Mars via a jump room located in California, in El Segundo, adjacent to the Los Angeles International Airport. Now, during Barack Obama's presidency, the White House denied everything. Now, they asked him these questions because it came out that he was part of this jump room, and the White House denied all of it, and denied that he was teleported to Mars in the 80s as a member of a secret CIA project. And so now another guy wrote, there's been several people that have come out about this. Now, why am I telling you this? Because they've already started with a technology that they were trying to use here at the Tower of Babel. Now, they were far more advanced than we are today, but we're not behind by much today. That's how we know that the Lord's going to come back. The Lord's going to stop this thing. So, this guy, Bernard Mendez, was born into a family involved deep in military service. His father, Bernard Mendez Sr., served in World War II for the U.S. Army and was intimately involved in secret military projects. At the age of 2, Mendez was observed by family members to have a seeming ability to see objects in the invisible range of the spectrum. There was something wrong with his eyes where he could see some invisible things. Now, this is what they're documenting, okay? I don't know if it's true. This is what they are saying, okay? And it says that was at the age of 2. Upon medical examination, it was discovered that he possessed an unusually high number of rods and cones in his eyes that allowed him to see in the dark. Throughout his youth, Mendez had numerous direct encounters with several ET races, and this continued into his teenage years. Now, according to this book here, there are several different alien races, according to them. I don't know if it's true. That's what they're saying, okay? So nobody knows if these things are true or what. I don't, however, know how you can make this stuff up. I guess you can, possibly. But anyway, by the age of 16, Mendez had enlisted into the United States Navy, where he was assigned to the Special Forces Command. On October 9th, 1970, he was part of a very bizarre abduction incident in Australia, and eventually was rescued by Navy SEALs, as reported in the Associated Press. So there was newspaper articles about all this. This incident caught the attention of President Richard Nixon, who asked to meet the young sailor at the White House. Eventually, Nixon recruited Mendez to be a special assistant in a secret government program dealing directly with extraterrestrials. He was sent to locations all over the world, including Alaska, Australia, China, France, the Antarctica, the North Pole, Catalina Island, K2, the fjords, as well as the infamous secret underground bases known as Area 51, and Camp Hero, which is a naval air station, Groom Lake, China Lake, and Clove Lakes. He visited these places in order to negotiate directly with various ET representatives on behalf of the U.S. government. Mendez even visited a secret underground base in England known as the Bat Cave. You thought that was old Batman stuff, you know. No, that stuff comes from somewhere. And the former Soviet Union's version of NASA, Kapustin Yar, near Volgograd, Russia. During his years of service, Mendez obtained what is known as a cosmic level clearance, designated Yankee White, which permitted him to work for the White House. He rose through many different access levels before eventually reaching access level 59. He was told he would go no further, even though there was an access level 60, which was the highest level. Well, from the spring of 1971 until Watergate scandal forced President Nixon to resign on August 9th, 1974, Mendez worked for the Nixon White House as a go-between between ETs and, well, actually a couple variations of aliens, I guess. He continued in secret government service for a brief period of time into the 1980s before retiring at a young age. In 2011, Mendez heard an interview of Andrew Basiago on Talks Radio's Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie about his participation in a secret government time travel program called Project Pegasus in the early 1970s, and a later secret Mars visitation program in the early 80s. Mendez contacted the American chrononauts, and they confirmed that they had served together in Project Mars, which was the CIA's Mars jump room program of the early 80s, with Barack Obama, Regina Dugan, William Stillings, William McCool, and other young Americans of their generation. So these are all documented stuff. Now, Mendez reported that there were 2 jump rooms, actually. One on the West Coast in California, and one on the East Coast in New York City. He said that the technology had been transferred from extraterrestrials to the U.S. government. And so the control room for both jump rooms, now so there was a control room in Ohio that had control over both jump rooms on the East Coast and on the East Coast and the West Coast. Now, so what am I saying about all this? Well, we are getting close to a technology that may have been used at the Tower of Babel. Something that we're tapping into. And what are all these extraterrestrials? They are fallen sons of God. That's all they are. Now, yeah, you get all these things, and it's amazing how you have Star Wars, you have Star Trek, and they all have different alien races or sex. Yes. And see, the thing that I'm finding out is if they could have reached high enough, they might have been able to reach a portal in there. It would have been possible for them. And God knew it and said, I've got to stop this thing before they get here. Now,
what I thought also was that these fallen angels, they needed a way to transport to Earth. They needed receptive something.
right.
And I always figured that and the Great Pyramid
Yes.
was basically, now that, I never said much about it, but that they had to set up a portal someplace.
That's right.
And that's why I even thought that, like I said, the Great Pyramid was that too.
I agree. And so now as I was studying this week, I stumbled over a passage in the book of Jasher that validates what we said last week about a council that was making decisions. And of course, we've already proven it from the Bible because this let us, Nimrod is the leader of these people. But now let me read this, and this validates what we saw last week. And so this comes out of the book of Jasher. And all the princes of Nimrod and his great men took counsel together, Phut, Mizraim, Cush, and Canaan with their families. And they said to each other, come, let us build us ourselves a city, and in it a strong tower, and its top reaching heaven. And we will make ourselves famed, so they're going to make a name for themselves, so that way so that we may reign upon the whole world, in order that the evil of our enemies may cease from us, that we may reign more mightily over them, and that we may not become scattered over the earth on account of their wars. And they all went before the king, Nimrod, and they told the king these words, and the king agreed with them in this affair, and he did so. And so this validates what we saw from the Bible here in the Word of God last week, with no help of any other source. Okay, we saw that clear as day. Now, let me continue. And they began to make bricks and burn fires to build the city and the tower that they had imagined to complete. And the building of the tower was unto them a transgression and a sin. And they began to build it. And whilst they were building against the Lord God of heaven, they imagined in their hearts to war against him and to ascend into heaven. So their hopes of reaching this, according to the book of Jasher, is to reach heaven and to make war with God in God's own domain, which is what Lucifer wanted in Isaiah 14, to try to get back to heaven and set his throne above the throne of God. Now, here's another possibility. And this comes out of the book of Jubilees. This has a portion in it as well. It says, for they departed from the land of Ararat eastward to Shinar. For in his days they built the city and the tower, saying, go to, let us ascend thereby into heaven. And they began to build. And in the 4th week they made brick with fire. And the brick served them for stone, and the clay, with which they cemented them together, was asphalt, which cometh out of the sea and out of the fountains of water in the land of Shinar. Basically, it's those geysers and the brimstone and the pitch, the tar beds there. And they built it. 43 years were they in building it. And it was never finished. Why? Because God came down and stopped it. Now, and according to the book of Jubilees, that's placed at 1645 to 1688 a.m. Remember, the flood was, if you do all the math, was 1656. So this was just a few years after that. They put it at 1645, but it couldn't have been 45. That would have been before the flood. So I would probably go with probably around 1688, if not 100 years later, probably. And then it goes on, it says the breadth was 203 bricks, and the height of a brick was the third of one. Its height amounted to 5,433 cubits and 2 palms. And the extent of one wall was 13 stades, and of the 30 stades. Now according to that, the height amounted to 1.54 miles into the air. That's how high it is according to that. The air at that altitude would be significantly thinner and cooler. So you're talking about a mile high, a mile and a half high into the atmosphere. I mean, you go down to Denver, and Denver is a mile high. That's what it's called, mile high. You go and you go to the top of some of those mountains, and you can't hardly breathe. I know we traveled to, we hiked up Perrin's Peak there in Colorado Springs one time. Me and my 2 brothers and my dad, and boy, it was tough to breathe up there. And so the effects of thinner air makes breathing more difficult. And so if you're not used to that high altitude, you're going to have a lot of trouble. And so according to this, they spent 43 years in building the tower, and it's not yet complete. And so And then it goes on. Well, and it says basically what it says in Genesis chapter 11 here. And God comes down and sees it, and he starts to mess up the languages. And so now, according to the book of Jasher, after God mixed the languages, then Jasher goes on and tells the genealogy of Genesis chapter 10. So, and what that means is chronologically then, that proves that Genesis chapter 11 goes before Genesis chapter 10. And we already made these comments, but see, the book of Jasher is validating, and we got to that without any help from any external sources, like the book of Jasher or Jubilees or anything. We already came to that, but this does back the Bible up on that. And so after the Tower of Babel incident, Jubilees says that Canaan, from after the Tower of Babel, then that's when Canaan illegally takes the land of Canaan and starts all that from there. And so, now what they were trying to do with the Tower of Babel, see, since they couldn't do what they set out to do, Canaan and Ham travel up the coast. They start these two cities to get to Mount Hermon. They got to try a different way to bring the fallen sons of God back to the earth. And so, because obviously God mixed the languages, and now they're being scattered upon the face of the earth, they couldn't do what they set out to do here. So we already talked that they went up the coast and started Tyre and Zidon, all to try to get to Mount Hermon. And I found out this week they called Og, king of Bashan, the king of the giants, actually. Not just the king of the land of giants, but he was the king of the giants as well. And so a lot of interesting stuff here. And so as soon as Canaan gets done with that, then Japheth goes down to Midian, and he starts the Medes that joined with the Persians later, the Medes and Persians. But the Media part was Japheth. And so anyway, now back to Genesis chapter 11. Now look at verse 5. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing. Now, when God says nothing will be restrained from them, God's not just flippantly throwing those words out. Look, they had to know what they were doing at this point. It had to have been possible. That means. This is God saying this. And so, it says, and the Lord came down. Now, undoubtedly, this is a theophany of Jesus Christ coming down. This is the angel of the Lord here. He obviously had to come down in a bodily form. And so, now, as the angel of the Lord. And it says, he came down to see the city and the tower. Now, when it says to see, that's more than just a passing glance or a casual observance. No, the Lord is inspecting this city and this tower firsthand. He's coming down, and it's kind of like Ecolab coming to the store to inspect. I mean, he's going to see, is this thing actually going to work? And God says, this is going to work. Because they've imagined to do this, and if they complete this thing and it works, there's nothing that they couldn't imagine to do if they get this thing working. They were on their way, and the Lord had to stop it. Now in verse 6 he says, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. Total integration for that area. This implies that the human race reached the goal of modern scholars today, education, scientists, religious leaders, and communists. These people in Genesis chapter 11 reached that. Now, they did it through absolute dictatorship. through communism and socialism. If the world's ever going to do that, it has to come down to that. They've got to force you to live together in a commune where everything is equal for everyone. Well, they reached that goal. And the Lord said they are one. They're united. A peace on earth under a dictatorship led by Nimrod. Behold, the people is one. They had a one mind and were united in that which they sought out to do, which was build a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. See, this is the great 20th century cause. Peace for all men everywhere, all men brothers, all men equal. That's what everyone seeks out. A oneness and a togetherness are never recommended in the Bible, except when it's speaking of God's people. See, when you get a bunch of people together and they're one, and it excludes God and God's people, you know that it's demonic. It's a demonic unity. You know, that's why man wants you to tolerate their sin and their transgenderism and their sodomy and the LGBTQ movement. Why? So they can have peace. But see, the Christian's the problem. Because we're not going to tolerate their sin. And so that's why the Jews and the Christians are the number one to be persecuted. And it's coming. It's coming. Now, since it's never recommended in the Bible except when it's speaking of God's people, then that means that otherwise it is a false unity with a false goal, an unworthy goal, a useless goal, an unholy goal, a temporary goal, and a goal on which God will pass judgment on. Now, God already passed judgment on the flood. And here they're rising up to dethrone God or try to get to the place where they can, and God has to pass judgment again. And he's already promised that he wouldn't do it by water. So God has to come up with another way because he's got to keep his promise, right? God who cannot lie. So God comes up with another way. Well, since they're all one, let's confound it. Let's mess it up. God recognizes the modern doctrine of unity for what it is, which is today, is the same as it was then. To tolerate sin while living in that culture. And remember, that's what we said. That's all it takes in order to grow this church numerically. To just tolerate the culture and the sin. Just come in as you are and leave as you are. Never change. See? It's the way to grow a big church. It's just unsaved man's attempt to take the universe into his own hands. That's what man wants to do. And this they begin to do, God says. And this they begin to do. In other words, building this tower and this city is just the beginning, which they've imagined to do. That's what it means. This is the start of it. And now, nothing will be restrained from them. In other words, nothing will be held back. There's nothing left. Whatever they start doing, there's nothing going to be held back from them to do. Now, this must be compared with chapter 8, verse 21. Chapter 8, verse 21, it says in the middle of the verse, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. And so it's evil. Chapter 6, verse 5, God makes the statement, God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. It's the same way here. Chapter 11, God knows nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. But every imagination which they have imagined. Put all three together, it reads, imagination, evil continually. Imagination of man's heart is evil, and nothing which they have imagined to do. Nothing's restrained from them. And so, now the revelation of these verses is completely negative. Nothing's going to stop them, God says. Not even the high elevation of the atmosphere is going to stop them. Even going up high enough where they can't breathe. That's not even going to stop them. God knows that their imagination is going to carry on into something more evil than just a building and a city and a tower. It's going to continue into something more. In fact, they want to kill God. Well, I mean, wait a minute. Are you connecting something here? You have a Tower of Babel, right? What does that look like? The Pyramid of Giza. Remember dispensationally when we went through the pyramid? That's Satan's dispensation. And remember what was up in the kings? There was a sarcophagus in there. Who do we say that sarcophagus was for? It's for God. Remember? Satan's plan is to dethrone God. And everything's dispensational up until the millennial reign. After the millennial reign, Satan's loosed, and that's when he's going to kill God, and he's going to put God's body in the sarcophagus that's never been used before. We taught all that when we went through the pyramids. That's exactly what they're going to try to reach heaven so they can get to God and use conventional means of killing a God, someone that can't be killed. But they think they can. They think they can. Just like the devil thinks he can. Isn't that something? They want to dethrone him. They want to reign over the universe. As God reigns over the universe. They think they can do it better than God. Well, that's the way man thinks. That's why Satan still is telling them, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. I believe they were trying to really get to heaven, the third heaven. They're trying to interact with the heavenly beings. I mean, we get into this thing, it's going to be eye-opening. It's going to be eye-opening what they're looking to do. And when you look at the scriptures, how does God build his millennium? How does God do it? And if God can build his millennium, don't you think Satan's going to counterfeit it? Well, we don't have time to get into that, but we're going to go through possibly next week how God builds his millennium and how these people were going to build theirs. And they're going to do it without God. And it takes some things. It takes some steps. But you know what? It's outlined right here in Genesis chapter 11, and it's the same. This is the same way God does it. God's going to build his millennial reign the same way. Well, we don't have time to get into that tonight. So I'll save that part for next week.